I found out my grandfather left me a cabin from a room that smelled like old paper and a coffee pot that had died sometime in the Reagan administration. The attorney's office sat above a barber on State Street, where the neon open sign buzzed louder than traffic. The lawyer, Mrs. Constance Avery, a woman with steel hair and sterner glasses, didn't bother with condolences. She slid an envelope across the desk as if it were a parking ticket. "Elias Hale bequeaths to you his cabin and all chattel on the property," she said, pinching each word like it might wriggle free. "There's a ledger he asked me to pass on personally. Says you'll know what to do with it when you're ready." I hadn't seen my grandfather in 8 years, not since he told my mom, in front of me at Thanksgiving, that the Hollers don't forgive, and Mason won't either if you keep feeding him lies about the world being simple. My mom stopped visiting after that, stopped answering his letters. When he died 2 weeks ago, it was a neighbor who called. The envelope contained a property deed, a hand-drawn map that looked like a treasure hunt sketched by a cartographer with OCD, and 2 keys on a ring shaped like a trout. Mrs. Avery produced a second item from her desk, a black notebook, oiled dark and rubbed smooth at the corners. It was heavier than it had any right to be. "Your grandfather called it a ledger," she said. "Said not to flip ahead, said read from the beginning. Said if you do that, you might live long enough to be mad at him." That sounded like Elias. I drove out the same afternoon. The Smokies rise like the backs of sleeping animals. Once you leave the interstate, the roads turn into cursive. The radio dissolved into static and AM preachers, then into nothing at all. It rained the way Tennessee rains, decisively and in one direction for 5 minutes, then from another direction for 10 more. Laurel Gap Road lost its paint lines, and after 3 more turns, its asphalt. The map pointed me along a track of crushed quartz to a clearing with a 1-room cabin, a stone chimney, and a porch swing that survived better than some marriages. There was no padlock, just the trout key and a stubborn latch. The interior smelled like pine, old tobacco, and long conversations held in silence. Shelves covered the walls, mason jars, tins, labeled envelopes, cigar boxes. A wood stove sat beneath a flue patched with flashing. There was a cot tucked behind a curtain, a table scarred by 1,000 knives, and 2 lamps waiting for matches. On the far wall hung a topographic map puckered with colored pins, blue, green, white, and a handful of rusty nails that meant something only to the man who'd placed them. I lit both lamps and set the ledger down. The book appeared handmade, thick paper, careful ruling, Elias's compact hand. First page, Boundary Ledger, Laurel Gap. E. Hale. Begin April 12, 1983. If you're reading this, you're either me or you're mine. Either way, read in order. Do not skip. Do not test the rules at night. The mountains keep score. Below, he'd drawn a line and wrote Rule 1, never whistle after dark. Rule 2, always feed on the dark of the moon. Rule 3, when the forest goes quiet, you listen too. There were a dozen more rules, each underlined, each with a margin note like a legal precedent. It read less like a hunter's log than a treaty. I turned another page and found weather entries, temperature, wind direction, barometer. He sketched the silhouette of the ridge and marked spots with coded letters, B bluebacks, K knee crawlers, V veilwings, and a symbol that looked like an ear drawn by a child. Listener. Next to it he'd written avoid, then scratched it out and wrote respect. It would have been easy to close the book, to drive back to Nashville and the barback shifts and the landlord who called me buddy like an insult. But 2 pages later, my grandfather's handwriting sharpened into confession. I did not keep anyone safe by killing. I kept them safe by counting. I watched the lines the way others watch fence posts. I learned that some things cross only when invited. Your mother thinks I went mad out here. She isn't wrong. But madness has more than one color. Sometimes it's the shade of a forest that will accept your apology. The rain tapered to a needlepoint. Night was sliding down the ridge like an animal settling into fur. I checked the kitchen shelves, beans, wax paper, coffee in a tin labeled decent. In the drawer beneath the stove, a box of 30-30 cartridges rolled against one another like bones. In the corner, a Winchester 94 cleaned enough to see your face in the receiver. Elias believed in rifles the way some men believe in saints, not for display. On the third lamplit page, he'd drawn a 90-day moon calendar with black dots circled in red. Feed nights. In the margin, protein is better, but corn will do. Never salt pork. Thank them with your hands even if they don't understand your words. It felt like reading a recipe written by a man who'd learned to cook for wolves. I stepped onto the porch with a sack of dry dog food from the truck, leftover from a neighbor's advice about raccoons, and a foil pack of jerky. It felt stupid, then ceremonial. I set the offerings on a stump that had been cut flat at perfect table height and backed away. Somewhere uphill, a barred owl ran through its litany of questions. A whippoorwill tried his one song and lost his breath. Then something else, something a person didn't talk about because it sounded like a porch story meant to fool city folk. It wasn't a howl. It was a chord. From the timber line at the edge of the property came a sound like a chord on a mouth made for vowels. It rose and fell. Another answered from the left. A third hung back as if listening. Underneath, I felt not heard, the low vibration that finds your bones before your ears. The ledger had a name for that, hum. I held the lamp higher. Elias had tacked an iron railroad spike above the door. My mother's father believed iron had opinions, and one of those opinions was no. The night didn't care about spikes. The chord resolved into 3 knocks on the eastern window. Not frantic, not weak, measured. If you've ever felt afraid in the exact way that makes you polite, then you understand how I walked to that window like a man obeying a sign in church. The knock came again. I raised the lamp waist-high and turned it toward the glass. Something stood in the trees 10 feet from the pane. It was tall enough to lift my heart into my throat, hunched in a way that said it could be taller. Eye shine catches a lamp's light and gives it back as a color, dear glow gold. This was blue, the pale blue of a pilot light. We stayed like that for a span of time you could only measure with blood pressure. Thank you, I heard myself say to the glass because the words in the ledger were in my mouth before I could choose them. For the hum, for I raised my hands, palms out. The reflection in the glass made me look like I was surrendering to myself. In the periphery, something lower to the ground flowed between shadows. The ledger had sketches. Knee crawlers moved like the ground learned to walk. I set the lamp on the sill and backed away, counting steps down from 5 the way my mom taught me to do when a long winter wanted to eat brain space. At the porch, I turned the lamp lower. The chord faded. The owl reclaimed the night. Cicadas restarted their power plant. Eventually, my heart remembered its job. I slept on the cot because to do anything else would feel like admitting the floor had rules I didn't know. The ledger lay open on a crate beside me, turned to a page titled Quiet Zones. Elias had drawn little ovals on the topo map and shaded them in blue. In the margin he'd written, Silence is a contour line like elevation. It pools, it drains. When it pools around you, you are not in danger if you are patient. Patience is the border between a guest and a trespasser. I woke before dawn to a shape against the window that was only a shape until breath fogged the glass. The lamp had guttered out. The room was thin gray. I heard claws against wood, not scraping, testing. I lay still until the sound circled the cabin once and then again. When the sun finally pulled the night off the porch, I stepped outside with my stomach trying to fold in on itself. The food on the stump was gone. In its place, a stone the size of a robin's egg, smooth with a natural hole through the middle. A hag stone, my grandfather would have said, and shallow ring marks incised into the surface. Elias kept 3 similar stones in jars on the shelf, dates in grease pencil on masking tape like he'd tried and failed to forget a birthday. I didn't plan to stay the week. I wasn't planning anything beyond coffee, but planning behaves like a, what did Elias write? Contour. It drains toward a deeper thing. I boiled water on the stove and flipped farther into the ledger against my own better judgment. June 4, 1991, 61 degrees F. Hum index 3 felt in chest. Observation, blueback approach to 12 feet during lamp test. No aggression, hand up / palm shown equals acceptable. Knocking pattern equals 3/3/ pause /1. I think they count. Rule revision, if a blueback knocks 3, answer with palm, not knock. Mirrors confuse them. A page later, an entry with spidery pen strokes. October 21, 1997. Never whistle after dark. I tested it. Fool that I am, I whistled Wildwood Flower. It came back to me wrong. It came back from 3 directions at once. They learn faster than we do when we pretend we're alone out here. Midday came damp and green. I followed the map to a metal pole sunk into the ground waist-high where Elias had mounted a trail camera. 2 more were strapped to hemlocks deeper in the property, weathered but intact. He'd labeled each with a number. The nearest carried a memory card. I brought it inside, found a shoebox full of adapters and a camera from the aughts with a screen barely big enough for a postage stamp. The red light winked to life, and the tiny display filled with deer, raccoons, a fox with the smug face they reserve for people who won't catch them. Then at 02, 13 2 nights ago, a blur too tall for a man and too narrow for a bear moved through the frame, a smear of motion that the camera wanted to make into something better behaved. The eye shine was blue. The angle suggested a face leaning down at the lens. The next frame was ferns. I should have been more frightened than curious. Curiosity is the handrail the dark wants you to grab. By late afternoon, I had found more of my grandfather's peculiar holiness. Meticulously labeled samples, hemlock sap, June sour, a pallet of soil cores capped with wax, and a weather radio modified with a wire that ran out the window to what looked like a mason jar full of ball bearings. In the ledger, he'd called it a HUM bottler. I didn't know if I was reading the notes of a naturalist or a wizard who refused to call himself one. This is the part where I tell you about the new moon because there had to be a new moon. The ledger had calendars inked with more care than a church ladies' registry. Tonight's square wore a neat black dot. In the margin, feed. Don't test the border on a dark night. I put a pork shoulder in the Dutch oven and stopped when I heard my grandfather's scrawl in my head, never salt pork. He'd written it twice. Dusk in a hemlock hollow is a type of darkness with its own brand. The world bled down to 2 colors, the lamp's honey and whatever waited beyond it. I set a platter meat, cornbread, 2 apples, and a pinch of coffee grounds in an enamel cup that had seen 1,000 trips into the woods on the stump. I raised both hands. "Thank you," I said again, and felt insane in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. They came in layers the way fog does. A chord hummed, and then the trees had shoulders. One blueback stepped close enough that I could measure it against the doorframe, taller than the top hinge by a head. Its hair, fur, sat not in shag but in lines that followed the muscle underneath. Its fingers were too long to be unfriendly and too careful to be clumsy. When my lamplight reached its face, the eyes threw back that winter gas stove blue. It blinked. The knee-crawler stayed off to my right, just an idea of joints placed where joints shouldn't go. I held out my hand, palm forward, steady as I could keep it. The blueback tilted its head in the exact way I tilt mine when trying to hear a song in a noisy room. Then it extended its hand, there's no other word for it, and placed 2 fingers against the glass. Not a tap, a presence. Behind it, deeper in the trees, the night thickened. The ledger had a symbol for that dark, the ear, the listener. Don't imagine horns. Imagine attention shaped like a creature. When it attends to you, you feel your name the way you feel a bass line in your sternum. It spoke, not with sound, with a meaning that found its way into me by a road I'd never used. Elias's blood. "My name is Mason," I said before I could wonder why my mouth moved. Elias tended. "You will read, you will count, you will keep." "I came to see the place," I said. I don't know if they understood words or posture or blood pressure or the way air moves around syllables. The blueback's eyes softened into something like curiosity. There are many kinds of fear. The kind that leans toward wonder is a door. From the timber line came another hum, deeper. The lamplight trembled. The blueback stepped back once, twice. The knee-crawler vanished into shadow like it invented the idea. The chord died mid-note. The night's regular insects restarted like a generator. My hands shook in a way that felt like an honest conversation with my nervous system. When I picked up the platter, a small arrangement remained. 3 twigs wound with a strip of bark and a cedar sprig threaded through the loop. Not a toy, not quite a snare. A marker. In the ledger, if they answer a feed with order, you behave with order in return. Keep the gift until you understand the exchange you accepted. I placed the twigs in a jar with the other things my grandfather had stored, sat down at the table, and found the first place in the ledger where he wrote about the listener without pretending he wasn't writing to me. March 3, 2004. I saw it again, the listener, and I did not run because it browses me like a book. It does not pick me up to eat me, only to know where my chapter ends. Mason, if you ever read this, you will want to test the boundary. You will want to see it closer. Do not seek it. You do not call a judge to your house to argue about fence posts. You wait at the property line, hat in hands, and mind your voice. I read until the lamp smoke told my lungs to stop pretending. I fell asleep with my cheek on the ledger and woke to a handprint on the window I hadn't noticed the night before. 4 long ovals and a 5th set back for a thumb. The oils from a pad that does not sweat the way ours do. In the pale light it looked like frost. My breath made its own circle inside the larger one. Beyond the clearing, a chainsaw started. The sound was far enough to be safe and close enough to be a problem. A second engine turned over, then a third. Trucks on the old ridge road. I stood on the porch and watched dust braid itself between the trees. When the lead truck broke into the clearing, the man behind the wheel was smiling the tight smile of someone who wants to sell you something he already believes you own. "Morning," he called, stepping out with a clipboard. "You must be Mr. Hale. I'm Trent Walker, Appalachian Ridge Minerals. We'll be surveying along the north line. Shouldn't bother you none. Just a few test pits. State says the permits are all in order." I looked past him to the tree line where a blue eyeshine might have been a trick of light or might have been a promise. I didn't invite him onto the porch. My grandfather's iron spike warmed in the sun above the door. "North line is private," I said, "and the quiet up there doesn't like strangers." He laughed the way men laugh when they've decided you're a quaint version of a no. "We'll stay on our side," he said. "Won't take a thing that's yours." Behind him, a second truck door opened. A younger man in an orange vest stepped out and threw a tape over his shoulder. For just a second, he hesitated like someone smelling lightning where there wasn't any weather. I thought about Elias's rules. About Rule 3, listen when the forest goes quiet. In the space between the second truck's engine turning off and a third engine catching, the forest did something cameras can't record. It tilted. Sound didn't stop, not all at once. It stepped back. The whip-poor-will swallowed his next question. The cicadas broke rhythm. The creek across the way seemed to burrow underground. "Folks get lost up there," I said. "I'd hate to have to find you later." Trent smiled wider. "We're professionals," he said, which is a sentence that in the mountains often means we brought enough hubris to last the week. He turned to call instructions. The younger man with the tape looked straight into the timber and took one step backward without turning his head. He saw something, or felt something alphabetical in his bones that didn't spell a word he knew. The ledger lay open on my table to a page headed "If they come with machines." My grandfather had not left me courage. He'd left me a responsibility that looked like cowardice until you learned the cost of bravery. Trent tipped his cap. "We'll be out of your hair by Friday." "Don't whistle after dark," I said, because I could not think of the right curse to lay on a man who didn't believe in them. He laughed again and got back in the truck. When they drove away, the forest resumed its conversation, but quieter, like it wanted to hear itself think. I picked up the ledger, ran my finger under Rule 2, feed on the dark of the moon, and imagined what happens when a man refuses a guest who came to dinner because he heard the invitation in a chord. That night I set out a bigger plate. The chord arrived from 3 points at once, high, low, and a distance that felt like the future walking back to check on me. The blueback placed its fingers against the glass, and I placed mine where their oils already made a print. Something deeper watched. The meaning it sent was not a sentence, but I can force it into one now. The border breathes. Choose how. At the exact moment I understood that I had been asked a question. Far off on the ridge a chain bit wood. The hum that came back from the trees was not a greeting. It was a warning. The ridge woke up sounding like a house trying not to wake the baby. Every hinge creaked softer. Every bird swallowed the first note and tried again. I brewed coffee in the tin percolator Elias called Decent, and drank it standing in the doorway with my boots unlaced, one eye on the timber line where the bluebacks had vanished, and the other on a sky that promised weather and then changed its mind. The ledger lay open on the table where I'd fallen asleep on it. Elias's moon chart still glistened slightly from where I'd smudged it with a thumb that probably had pork fat on it. I turned back to an earlier section I'd skimmed last night, a map of the property traced over a Usk's topo with pencil so hard it left grooves. He'd shaded ovals the color of old denim and labeled them quiet zones. It hadn't clicked then, quiet as a mood. Morning made me see them as basins. I don't have a degree in acoustics. I have a lifetime of listening to rooms, bars, sanctuaries, basements where bands practice until the joists learn the chords. Some rooms eat sound, some rooms throw it back. What Elias had drawn were places the ridge swallows noise. Sound rolls into them and won't roll out. In the margin he'd written, "If the night pours silence downhill, stand where it pools. Counting is safer there." I stepped off the porch and walked to the first basin on his map, an indentation in the laurel 200 yards east where the slope folds like a pocket. I clapped once. The sound didn't go anywhere. It landed 3 feet in front of me and fell into the ground like rain hitting dry dust. I moved 5 paces west and clapped again. Same hands, same force. It snapped and came back, a polite echo off a stand of hemlock trunks. The difference told me Elias wasn't making poetry. He was surveying. I marked my position with a twig flag and went to the next oval. Clap, swallowed. Another. Clap, tossed back. By 10:30 I had 15 little twig flags in spots that sounded like a room full of coats. I pictured a crew of men in orange vests and hard hats trying to whistle in a place that refuses to answer. Back in the cabin, I sketched my flags onto the topo, then turned to a ledger entry from 1990 where Elias had diagrammed his poor points. Low saddles where quiet flows from one basin to the next like water between bowls. He'd drawn arrows from basin to basin and shaded the saddles with cross-hatching. If you have to move at night, move with the quiet. Do not fight its current. It is the river that chooses whether to drown you. In the corner, he'd added a stamp of a blue thumb, inked, pressed, and left. He did that throughout the book whenever he thought he'd written something worth arguing with yourself about later. I wanted to test it at scale. When you don't have equipment, you make some. I dug out an enamel wash pan from under the cot and a spoon so dented it had a memory. I tied the pan to a nail on the porch post and thwacked it with the spoon. The note it made was a metallic pong that reminded me of summer camps and frustration. I walked the yard and hit the pan at each flag, listening to how the ring traveled, beeline stalled. In the center of the eastern basin, the pan died mid-note like a kid who forgot the words. This was where Elias counted. I could feel it. My grandfather's trail cameras weren't top shelf, but they were stubborn. After noon, I hiked the 3 he'd mounted closest to the north line, swapped cards, and sat with the tiny screen, arrowing through deer blinking at infrared, raccoons with hands too human for comfort, the occasional fox moving like it knew a punchline. Then at 02:09 last night, the blueback. It didn't glide through the frame. It entered like a decision. The infrared washed its shape into flat gray, but the mass was there, the posture, forward tilt curiosity, head canted, arms loose. It walked to a sapling on the boundary, tore a strip of bark away with 2 careful fingers, and bent without looking rushed. When it stood, a small arrangement hung on the sapling, 2 twigs lashed with a ribbon of bark and a cedar sprig, the same order I'd found on my stump. The second camera, 20 yards west, caught the blueback moving off, and then pausing at a second sapling to hang another arrangement, similar, not identical. The third camera recorded only a blur and a hint of an arm with hair that lay in lines, not fluff. At 02:29, both frames at once filled with absence, not black, not motion, less than either. The timestamp flickered. A second later, both cameras resumed as if someone's hand had lifted off the pause button. I recognized the feeling in my stomach. I've had it in the ocean when a wave stands up taller than you expect and doesn't decide whether to crown you until it's already curling. The ledger had a symbol for that missing second, the ear with 4 lines. The listener attending. Elias's notes about the markers were methodical in a way that made me want to hug him and then smack the back of his head. He'd cataloged combinations: 2-stick, 3-stick, doubled cedar, cedar reversed. When they hang 2 in a row with the cedar pointing uphill, do not go that way. When the cedar points downhill, they are encouraging you not to be a moron. Bluebacks don't write letters. They write weight, of meaning, of arrangement. And if you answer with careless order, you're speaking a careless no. I took out the 2 gifts I'd received, the hag stone with ring marks and the twisted twig bundle with cedar. I'd stored them in separate jars. On the table, they looked like a child's project and a piece of river. On impulse, I set the hag stone beside the twig bundle and noticed something I should have seen last night. The twig binding had a loop not just tied but twisted, and the hag stone's hole wasn't perfectly round. It had a tiny nick the exact size of the knot's fattened twist. I threaded the stone through the loop and felt it settle like a lock falling into place. The cedar sprig leaned to one side after the twist, pointing, not north, not south. I laid a compass beside it. It pointed to 118 degrees, southeast. On the topo, that line ran from the porch to the corner of the cabin where the hearth sat like a piece of old church. Okay, I said to an empty room that didn't feel empty. Okay. The hearth was dry-laid stone, Elias's work from the look of it, proud but practical, notched for an ash shovel, patched with a flat piece of mica where a brick had given up. I went to my truck for a pry bar and a flashlight, then knelt and ran my fingers along the mortar. In 3 places the gray was a shade newer. Elias had been a meticulous man. He was worse than a fugitive. I worried a trowel between 2 stones and levered gently. The stone gave like a tooth he'd already loosened before the appointment. Behind it, a cavity big enough for a 6-pack and a pack of bad decisions. Inside, a package wrapped in oilcloth and bound with twine and a little bell with a rusted tongue. The bell made no sound when I tipped it gently, which reassured me more than it should have. I set the bundle on the table and rolled the oilcloth away. The second ledger wasn't black. It was the color of tea left on a hot plate. Its cover had been scratched by something with patience. Inside, the paper was thinner, the lines closer, the hand not as tidy. Those same blue thumbprints appeared, more of them, more rushed. On the first page, Elias had written, "Supplemental Ledger, Laurel Gap. For when you are a fool but determined not to be a dead one." He'd circled the line and written under it, "If you found this by trying to be clever, congratulations. Now be careful. This is where I wrote fast. Fast writing is for things with teeth." The entries here were as much confession as data. October, day torn, 1987. They took Michael back to the oak, or the oak took Michael back to itself. Found what I found. Buried what I could carry with hands that didn't drop. Told no one. If you tell, they come with lights. Lights break what quiet remains. Add rule. Never offer a dog to a mountain that eats songs. I did not offer. It interpreted a bark as an insult. I will dig until my arms fall off and dress the hole for Rex the way I will dress my own. 4. Felt in jaw. Meadow larks refuse direction all day. Children's voices in creek. Not a metaphor. Pages bled into each other like a man trying to keep up with a fire. Different ink. Pencil where the pen must have broken. Coffee rings. A smear I didn't want to name. June 1993. The rules are changing. Not theirs, ours. They enter quiet. We make noise at night now. Logging crept up the south and the west, and the men on the ridge laughed like men who don't know which laughs are prayers. I built quiet zones with cedar and iron nails and bread and a hymn. They took the hymn and left the rest. Bread sour by morning, iron rusted by noon, cedar stripped with teeth. They wanted order, not church. Revised rule: if you must sing, sing without melody. Melody is a road. Roads invite company. I closed the book and pinched the bridge of my nose until lights bloomed behind my eyelids. The urge to read ahead tugged at me hard as undertow. I went back to the first ledger like a man returning to a textbook and not to an argument he's losing. Over the sink, a mason jar sealed with wax held ball bearings and a wire like the tail of a kite. The label read HUM-12, High Saddle, Cedar Break, 1989. I shouldn't have. I cut the wax with a pocket knife and lifted the lid. The jar contained only air and metal, but when I pressed my ear to the mouth, I heard a sound I haven't been able to give words to since. The closest I'll get is when a train is no longer on the tracks and the rails still ring, and you realize the hills also have rails and they're all still ringing too. I set the jar down and resealed it with tape because I didn't have wax and pretended the tape was good enough. At 3, clouds shouldered their way over the ridge like a tired linebacker and made a short show of it. The rain was brief and decisive. The cabin roof ticked. The creak, which I hadn't noticed all day, found a louder voice and then settled. The air afterward smelled like you want it to, chlorophyll and pennies and something old enough to be the first word. I took a sandwich on heel bread out to the porch and ate it looking at the north line. Where the blueback had hung the twig markers, there were now 3. The center one had been rotated, cedar pointing downhill, and the new arrangement had a small oak leaf tucked in. Elias's notes came back. Cedar downhill equals move, oak equals law. I didn't want to need the translation. I strapped on the camera and headed toward the line, slow and obvious, hands where they could be seen, elbows away from my ribs. At the sapling, the 2 original arrangements hung as before, but the new one was different. A 4th element added, a stone chip wedged into the binding, a sliver flaked like a tool. Its flat side faced east and shone with the dregs of rain. A little triangle of light pointed to a shallow game path. The path didn't go to the mine. It went to the saddle between my eastern basin and the next, one of Elias's poor points. I stepped into it and felt my ears pop the way they do when an elevator loses an argument with physics. The saddle was a corridor, a quiet corridor. Even the creak sound lost its edge here. Someone had dragged a tree trunk across the way on the far side and left it as a step over. The bark bore 3 scratches, not a claw rake. Counted. 3. The knocks on my window last night, 3. The blueback wanted me to think in threes. From the saddle, I could see the flagging tape the mine crews had tied to saplings along what they believed to be the property line. Plastic fluttered like fish fins. Someone had written a RM7 with a Sharpie on one strip. I took a photo of it and matched it on my map. Their planned test bore sat dead center in a poor point, a place where the quiet drains and then condenses. If you were a machine and you wanted to make noise work harder than usual, you would drill right there. I followed the quiet corridor downhill until my skin felt like a damp shirt, and then stopped because stopping is part of reading a room. A blueback stood 20 yards away, shoulder deep in laurel. I didn't pretend I didn't see it. I raised my right hand, palm forward, the way Elias had drawn the silhouette so many times the page seemed tired of being folded there. It lifted its hand in reply. I swear to you it did. We stood like that, each of us an idea of politeness, until something behind it dragged attention away, mine and its. It turned its head toward the north and the ridge beyond, where a metallic clank echoed off the hemlocks. Not a chainsaw, a winch or a rig foot dropping. The blueback lowered its hand and stepped backward into shadow without turning, the same way the young surveyor had yesterday at my clearing. I retreated up the quiet corridor toward my property line, repeating a thing I'd read last night because saying a sentence sometimes fools your legs into remembering where to go. Move with the quiet, move with the quiet, move with the quiet. At the saddle, I rested, took the stone and twig key from my pocket and set it on a flat rock. The cedar leaned east. The stone chip shone west. The twig loop pointed down, not up. If this was language, I could read verbs and gestures, not yet poetry. Back at the cabin, I spread both ledgers, 2 maps, the trail cam stills, and the markers on the table like I was the kind of person who solves things by arranging them in neat piles. Outside the window, the stump where I'd made last night's offering was empty except for the dark stain left by the coffee grounds cup. I wrote in my own notebook, Mason's Notes, Laurel Gap, Day 2. 1. Quiet zones equals acoustic basins. Saddle pour points connect them. 2. Bluebacks mark routes with order twig/cedar/stone. Cedar direction matters, they count. 3. Keeps repeating. 3. Trail cams glitch when the listener attends, time stutters. Jars bottle hum the way jars bottle peaches. 4. Mind test bore sighted in a pour point. Noise will pour into it and not come out nice. 5. Hearth hide right arrow second ledger darker faster. Elias lost more than Mom said. The job ate him on schedule. I stopped writing because a long, slow vehicle rolled down the rutted track to the gate. A county truck, tan, not white, with a green stripe that announced sheriff in block letters, stopped where the quartz met mud. I heard the door open, then boots on gravel. I set the second ledger under the tablecloth because Elias wouldn't forgive me if I left it naked to a badge, and stepped onto the porch. The deputy wore the uniform like it belonged to him, and not like a costume. 40s maybe, with a squint that said he believed in both sunshine and what it revealed. Name tag, H. Prout. He took off his hat as soon as he crossed the gate, which made me like him before he spoke. Mr. Hale, he said, I'm Henry Prout. Sheriff asked me to come up and have a polite conversation. Polite's my favorite kind, I said, and meant it. It's the only kind that doesn't turn mountains feral. He glanced at the cabin, at the iron spike above the door, at the twig markers the bluebacks had hung on my east sapling. He didn't pretend not to see them. He also didn't ask. That put him in the top 5% of men who have ever worn green-striped trucks up a holler. One of the survey crews for that mining outfit didn't check in last night, he said, straightforward. Young fella named Tanner Pike, 23, fresh out of a program down at Walters State, parents in Newport, mama who can worry like a job. You seen anybody up here this morning, hear anything that'd make a stomach turn? I thought of the blueback's hand on the glass. I thought of the non-sound of a camera skipping a second. I thought of a sentence in Elias's second ledger where he advised how to answer the law without lying to either side of the ridge. I saw trucks yesterday, I said. They went north along the line. I told the man in charge the quiet up there doesn't like strangers. Deputy Prout's mouth tightened a degree. The quiet, he said, not as a joke. Yes, sir. He stood there a moment with his hat in both hands, thumb brushing the brim like he was reminding it of its job. Your grandfather was a good man, he said. He brought us coffee when deputies had to stand on the ridge at 2 a.m., looking for a hunter who wasn't as clever as he thought. He also told tall stories with a straight face. Those two facts don't cancel each other out. I'm learning that, I said. The mine boys aren't locals mostly, he said. Company brings them in with day rates and promises they'll go home with cash, not skin. We like folks leaving with both. Sheriff will send a formal search in the morning if Tanner doesn't call his mama by supper. I'm up here now because the sheriff wanted a conversation before a caravan. I don't recommend caravans, I said. That's so. It changes the room, I said, and hated how city that sounded. He squinted past me into the trees like he was reading a page over someone's shoulder. "Mr. Hale," he said softer, "if you see a young man in an orange vest who looks like he forgot how to believe in things, you call me first. Not the company man, not the state, me." He tapped his breast pocket where a notepad rode. He wrote his number in tidy block digits on card stock and handed it to me. "I'll come quiet." We stood in the coasting moment between two gears. Something in the forest coughed like a bear with manners. The deputy tilted his head. "You got a dog?" he asked. "Not anymore," I said, and the ledger under the cloth felt heavy. He nodded once, understanding the way mountain people do even if the math doesn't show its work. He put his hat back on and settled it like a decision. "Stay out of the north after sundown," he said. "Not a suggestion. I don't have the right to order you. I have the decency to say the thing anyway." "I won't fight the quiet," I said. He half smiled at that, tipped his hat, and walked back to the truck with the particular rhythm of a man who knows how to leave without turning his back on a door. He drove off slow. Dust lifted and then settled and then didn't. Because after his taillights dipped out of sight, another engine took the gate without stopping. A white pickup with a company logo I didn't need to read flashed past and rattled the quartz. It paused long enough for the driver to lean out and check my porch. It wasn't Trent. A younger man, with a buzz cut and a jaw that hadn't learned the word later. "You Mason Hale," he called like he wanted me to be. "Who's asking?" I asked back because this is a country where you answer questions with questions long enough to give yourself time to think. "Company safety," he said, and pronounced both syllables like orders. "Guy on our crew walked off last night. We're checking properties." "Your company owns none of this," I said. "And you don't either." He smirked the way a man does when a map and a paycheck give him religion. "You holler if you see him," he said. "Name's Tanner. He's a wanderer. We can handle him." He revved the engine like a punctuation mark and then ground his way north. I stood there with Deputy Prute's card in my hand and the second ledger under a cloth and a key of sticks and stone on the table, and the sense that a room I'd just learned to read had decided to modify itself. Storm light bruised the ridge again. Not from rain, from pressure. The trees leaned without moving. The cabin felt shorter. When I swallowed, my ears cracked like cellophane and didn't clear. I walked to the hearth because if you're going to face a thing you weren't taught to name at school, you face it with a hand on brick. The bell I'd found in the hearth niche moved against its will, a single dull tink with no ring. The hush that followed was not absence. It was presence choosing not to speak. I lifted the stone and twig key and set it on the windowsill, cedar pointing east the way the blueback had rotated last hour. I turned down both lamps until the wicks looked like punctuation. I breathed with my mouth closed because an old man taught me once that's how you learn what kind of fire is in the room with you. From the timber line, the hum rose, low and wide, a chord shaped like a bowl. It rolled toward the cabin the way fog does through headlamps, showing you more air than you knew how to see. The hearing part of my skull moved out of the way to make room for something else. The first ledger fell open on the table by a wind that wasn't wind. The second ledger felt warmer under the cloth. And from the north, where the pour point sat like a throat, came a sound men mistake for weather until they learn it isn't. Footsteps. One set. A human cadence with fear laid over it like a second-time signature. They stopped at the gate. The figure only then let the breath he'd been hoarding out in a single sob. I didn't mean to move. My legs took the porch stairs before my head approved the paperwork. The figure stumbled into the clearing, orange vest, hat gone, one knee raw, eyes broadcasting news his mouth couldn't print. "Tanner," I asked, because asking a name is a way of inviting a person's soul back into their skin. He flinched so hard he almost fell. "Don't," he said. "Don't whistle. Don't." He looked over his shoulder at the black seam of trees like a man watching a door he forgot to close. From the ridge, the hum thickened. A separate sound answered, metal on metal, wrong in a forest, something from the mine road, more trucks, more men. I put my hands up, empty, palms forward. The room had rules. Elias had written them down so I wouldn't invent my own. "Come inside," I said to Tanner, and he obeyed the way wet things obey towels. I got him to the table, to water, to the corner where a man can see two windows without turning. He stared at the bell on the mantel and at the ledgers without understanding what he was seeing, which is a kind of mercy. His lips moved without organizing words until one sentence found a path. "They sang," he said. I didn't ask who. The trucks on the ridge ground gears and men laughed the wrong laugh, and the hum in the trees answered in a tone a body recognizes as decision even if the brain refuses the translation. The cabin breathed in. The blueback markers swung on their bark ribbons as if wind had discovered a new trick. The little bell didn't ring. It didn't have to. Deputy Pruitt's card lay on the table next to my hand like a choice and not like paper. I picked it up. Outside, at the edge of the clearing, a silhouette stepped from laurel to open air, taller than my door by a head, hair laid in lines, eyes giving back the winter gas blue. It lifted its hand. I lifted mine. Behind it, deeper, the air dimmed enough that a man could see what absence looks like when it wears a shape for your benefit. Meaning found me the way a train finds coins left on rails and leaves them changed. The border breathes. Choose how. The sheriff's cruiser turned in at the gate, its tires polite as a prayer on the quartz. The deputy's hat appeared over the wheel, then his hand on the radio. His eyes found mine, then the blueback, then Tanner, then the ridgeline with trucks. And in that half-second I watched a man weigh law against order and decide to count to 3 before he spoke. He raised his palm to me like I'd taught him the gesture myself. "Mr. Hale," he said, "we're going to do this quiet." The hum rose, the trucks revved, the ledgers waited, and the night started writing the next part for me. The next morning the forest smelled like wet copper. Not rain, not rot, something metallic that had no business on a mountain. I sat on the porch with a chipped mug of coffee, watching mist drain from the ridges into the hollers like milk poured too fast. Tanner Pike slept inside on the cot, still wearing the orange vest, twitching whenever the wind touched the windows. The first ledger lay open on the table. Last night's HUM had left my bones hollow, but Elias's handwriting kept me upright. Move with the quiet. Do not fight its current. Noise is a trespass you can't explain away. By mid-morning I heard trucks, multiple engines coughing up the old ridge road, forcing laughter into the woods the way men do when they're trying not to hear themselves think. I walked to the property line where Elias's twig markers still hung, cedar pointed downhill, oak leaf faded. The mine crew was laying flagging tape across saplings every 30 yards. Neon orange snapped in the wind like warning shots. They were turning the border into geometry, ignoring the way sound pooled and poured, ignoring the basin Elias had drawn 30 years ago. One foreman, Trent Walker, clipboard man, spotted me. His smile was all lawyer. "Mr. Hale," he called. "Just marking our survey lines. State map says we're clear." I held up Elias's topo with its ovals shaded blue. "State maps don't mark silence," I said. The younger men didn't look at me. They looked at the ground, at their tape, at the Sharpie numbers bleeding onto plastic. But I saw it in their shoulders. They felt the HUM last night. They weren't ready to call it that, but their bones knew. When the crew pushed east toward the basin, the forest answered. The first blueback appeared 20 yards off the tape, upright, still as a fence post. Then another, then 3 more, stepping into sight one by one. No charge, no roar, just presence, a wall of reflective blue eyes under the canopy. The crew froze. One man muttered a prayer into his fist. Trent barked, "Don't spook. They're bears, that's all. Bears walk funny when they've been shot at." But the bluebacks didn't walk funny. They walked deliberately. Together they shifted left, then right, then back again, funneling the surveyors toward a safe seam on Elias's map, the corridor of quiet that drained between 2 basins. It was hurting, but polite, like ushers guiding latecomers to church pews. The miners obeyed without knowing they were obeying. They stumbled into the seam, flags drooping, eyes refusing the blue reflection. One man dropped his tape reel. He didn't pick it up. The bluebacks held the line until the men were well past the basin, then melted into shadow. I'd just seen proof of what Elias wrote 100 times. They respect borders if taught. You can teach with patience, not with bullets. Back at the cabin, I checked the trail cam mounted over that very seam. The grainy screen showed it all. Men moving, bluebacks shifting them like sheepdogs with no teeth bared. One frame froze on a blueback's hand mid-gesture, palm out, fingers splayed. The same sign I'd given at the window. I copied the still onto a cheap printer I'd found in Elias's trunk of supplies. A photo, even blurry, carried more weight than my word. Proof that borders weren't superstition. Proof that my grandfather hadn't been insane. By late afternoon, another sound split the ridge, not flagging tape this time, but steel teeth. A test drill rig, different crew, different trucks. They parked north of the basin, exactly at a pour point where silence drains like water through a sieve. The drill whined into stone. Noise shivered through the air wrong like static on a tooth filling. Birds fled the trees in frantic bursts. Even the creek changed pitch. I felt it in my jaw. The HUM wasn't answering this time. It was building. The bluebacks didn't appear. Not yet. They were waiting, letting the machine commit its trespass deeper. Elias's second ledger had warned me. Noise is blood, pour it wrong and the ridge drinks too much. I thought of Tanner on the cot, eyes still swollen with songs he didn't ask to hear. I thought of Deputy Pruitt's card in my pocket, the number written in block digits. And I thought of the way Elias had circled one rule twice. If they come with machines, count every second. Machines don't know how to count, but the forest does. I stood at the cabin window watching dust rise from the north line like smoke from a fuse. My grandfather's ledgers lay open, both of them, the neat book and the hurried one, their pages whispering the same warning. The border breathes. And when breath turns shallow, lungs become teeth. The drill shrieked once more, louder than before, then stopped mid-bore. Not because the crew shut it down, because something else shut it down. The men's voices rose sharp, panicked. A silence heavier than night fell over the ridge. From my clearing I heard the forest hum once, low and long, like a throat clearing before a verdict. And I knew the quiet zones weren't going to stay quiet. The drill scream still lived in my teeth when night came. Even after the machines went silent, the air felt bruised, like the mountain had taken a punch and hadn't decided whether to hit back. Tanner wouldn't go near the window. He sat in the corner with a blanket over his shoulders, whispering to himself, one phrase over and over, "Don't whistle, don't whistle, don't whistle." I didn't correct him. He'd already learned the rule the hard way. It began just after 9, when the last light bled out of the ridge. A sound rose from the timber line, not the hum this time, but something higher, sharper. A single tone, pure as a tuning fork struck against stone. Then another joined it, lower, drawn out, then another. I stepped onto the porch and set the lamp on the rail, its circle of honey light barely reaching the stump where I'd left offerings the past 2 nights. The tones grew into a pattern. Call, response, harmony. Not birds, not coyotes, not men. The bluebacks were singing. The ledger had described it once. When the moon pulls, they answer. When the moon hides, they hum. But when the moon shows her full face, they sing, and the song is a calendar. I looked up. The moon was nearly full, white and merciless over the ridge. Shapes moved among the trees, not 1 or 2 dozens. Blueback stepped into the clearing edge, tall, hunched, reflecting the lamplight in pairs of pale blue eyes. They didn't advance. They didn't need to. The sound advanced for them. The harmony thickened until it pressed against my chest. Notes rose, overlapped, then locked into rhythm like waves. For a moment I thought my ribs might crack from the resonance. Then it evened out, steady, measured. Behind me, Tanner whimpered. "They're counting," he said. "God help us, they're counting." I forced myself to listen, not with ears but with attention, the way Elias had instructed in his neat ledger. Patterns emerged. The first phrase repeated every 20 seconds. The second phrase echoed, shorter, every 15. Then the third phrase stretched longer, 35. I flipped to Elias's moon chart. He'd drawn circles, phases, cross-hatched dates. In the margins, their songs equals time signatures. Count the rests matter. I listened again. The rests were longer on the downbeat. They lined up with lunar cycles, like the song itself was a map of days. I realized Elias hadn't been exaggerating. He had scored the mountains. The bluebacks weren't just filling silence. They were marking time, keeping record, a living calendar. The music rose. For a moment it wasn't frightening, it was beautiful, inhuman but ordered, like hearing whale song translated into the shape of mountains. My throat tightened, not with fear but with awe. Tanner couldn't take it. He clamped his hands over his ears and shouted, "Stop it, just stop it." The song broke. Every blueback head turned toward the cabin. The silence that followed was worse than the music. The forest held its breath. Even the creek stopped sounding like water. One stepped forward, taller than the rest. The same one that had pressed its hand to my window. I raised my palm, slowly, deliberately. My heart was sprinting, but my hand stayed steady. The blueback mirrored me. The silence held for 3 long breaths. Then the song resumed, softer, adjusted, as if they had edited Tanner's outburst into the score. When the song ended, the bluebacks turned as one and drifted back into the timber. Their eyes winked out until only the moon lit the clearing. On the stump lay something new. Not twigs, not stones. A lattice of small bones woven together in a precise grid, each joint aligned, each angle intentional. Elias's hurried ledger had a drawing of the same shape. His note, bone lattice equals alphabet, not language yet, but grammar. My stomach nodded. This wasn't just communication, it was instruction. I turned the lattice in my hands, moonlight threading through the holes. The pattern wasn't random. It matched the outline of one of Elias's shaded basins, the quiet zone east of the cabin. They weren't just teaching me to count, they were teaching me to read. From the north ridge came a metallic groan, the mine crew testing their drill again. The bone lattice snapped in my grip with a sound too loud for its size. And in the trees, the bluebacks began to sing again. But this time the notes were sharp, discordant, a warning. Morning smelled of wood smoke that wasn't mine. I woke on the cot with the bone lattice laid across my chest like a question waiting for an answer. Tanner was gone from the corner, his blanket balled against the wall. His boots were missing too. The ledger had warned me, guests don't stay long, if they leave before dawn, don't chase. The mountain keeps what it means to keep. I hoped that was true. The lattice was delicate, 30, maybe 40 bird bones, bleached and bound with sinew into a grid of squares. Moonlight the night before had threaded through it like a stencil. In daylight, it looked almost childlike until you noticed the precision. Each intersection lined at a perfect right angle, every joint fitted so tight the structure creaked when I tried to twist it. I set it on Elias's topo map. At first, nothing lined up. Then I remembered the way he shaded basins in blue. I slid the lattice east until one corner matched the oval of the nearest quiet zone. It clicked into place. The grid didn't just cover the basin, it mapped it. Tiny gaps in the bone lines matched hollers, ridges, even the creek bend. At the very center, one square was darker, bones doubled, thicker, reinforced. Elias's hurried ledger had a sketch of the same shape with the note. When they double the center, it means keep OUT. I grabbed my compass, camera, and a roll of string. If the lattice was a map, I wanted to walk it. The eastern basin was a 20-minute hike through laurel so thick it combed your sleeves. When I reached the spot the double square should cover, I tied string to a branch and started pacing a rough square. The air changed halfway across. Not colder, not warmer, denser. Sound dulled. My own footsteps felt muffled as if I were walking inside wool. At the exact center, birds stopped. No calls, no wings, not even a squirrel. I clapped once. The noise died before it reached my ears. Silence pooled. The ledger had called it a quiet well. I thought of Elias's words. Silence is a contour line. It drains. Don't stand where it drains too long. I took 3 photographs and backed out fast, string still dangling behind me like a fuse. Back at the cabin, I studied the photos. In the dirt at the double square's center under the filtered sun, something faint but unmistakable appeared. Stones arranged beneath the leaf litter. Not natural. A circle. Elias's rushed handwriting in the second ledger had mentioned it. October 1987. Found Michael Briggs. What was left of him, buried what I could. Didn't mark it with wood, wood rots. Used stone, stones last. The name burned through memory. Briggs, a hiker who vanished in the '80s. Mom used to mention him when warning me not to wander. They never found him, Mason, but Elias had. The lattice hadn't been a warning, it was a reminder. They remembered Briggs too. That night I set an offering on the stump, jerky, bread, apples. Then I added the lattice, carefully balanced, bones cleaned, string binding replaced with twine. A show of respect. At midnight the HUM rose thicker than usual. Bluebacks appeared at the clearing edge, watching. One stepped forward, the same tall one with eyes like blue gas. It touched the lattice with a hand too large to be gentle, but it was. The lattice broke, not shattered, but rearranged itself. Bones shifted until the shape resembled something new, not a grid, but a triangle pointing north. On the map, that triangle led straight to another basin, one Elias had never shaded. The blueback left the triangle on the stump. Then it turned, gestured once, an unmistakable beckoning, and vanished into trees. At dawn, the sound of gravel under tires pulled me outside. Deputy Pruitt's county truck rolled into the clearing, dust trailing like a ghost. He stepped out with his hat in hand, eyes tired. "We found Tanner," he said. I braced. He was walking down Highway 25 barefoot. Wouldn't stop talking about songs in the woods. Doctor says he'll mend, but his mom has wrecked. She kept asking if he saw your grandfather's cabin. He paused. His eyes landed on the triangle lattice still sitting on the stump. "That new?" he asked. I didn't answer. Pruitt let out a breath. "Sheriff's office is filing missing person paperwork on another one of the mine boys. Name's Pike. Not Tanner, his older cousin, Dylan. He was on night watch at the drill site. Never clocked out. That makes 2 men the company's lost in as many weeks. They're not saying it loud, but they're spooked." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Sheriff wants to know if you're willing to cooperate. If this is land disputes, boundaries, whatever, maybe we head off trouble before it turns biblical." I looked past him at the trees, at the triangle lattice, at the direction it pointed. "Boundaries," I said softly. "That's exactly what it is." Pruitt squinted as if he'd heard something I hadn't. "You hear that?" he asked. The forest had gone quiet again. Not empty, listening. From the north ridge near the drill site, a cry rose. Not human, not animal. Long, broken, furious. The bone lattice on the stump snapped in half, both pieces now pointing north. And I realized the bluebacks hadn't just given me an alphabet. They'd given me a command. The ridge didn't sleep. It shifted, breathed, pressed. After the lattice snapped on the stump, pointing north, the cabin felt smaller, as if the walls knew a secret I didn't. I read both ledgers until my eyes blurred, but no page prepared me for what the forest wanted now. Deputy Pruitt left before dusk. He didn't push. Just touched the brim of his hat and said, "If the mountain puts you on jury duty, Mr. Hale, don't lie to it." Then he drove down the track, dust curling like handwriting in the trees. The broken lattice pointed me north, toward a basin Elias had never shaded. I strapped on the Winchester camera and a pack with water, not because I thought the rifle would matter, but because Elias always carried it and rituals protect as much as iron. I entered the basin by way of the triangle path the lattice suggested. From the first step, sound bent. The creek behind me vanished, replaced by a hush like air pulled through cloth. Laurel brushed my sleeves, then recoiled as if touched by static. The trail narrowed to a saddle, one of Elias's poor points. The silence thickened until my ears popped. Then the hum rose, not from one direction but all. My ribs vibrated like tuning forks. And then it stepped into view. It wasn't a blueback, too tall, too deliberate. Its skin or fur shifted color with the canopy, like bark sliding over stone. Its face was almost human but stretched, eyes black wells with no whites. The listener. It didn't open its mouth. Instead, meaning arrived in me like memory, Elias's blood. Elias watched, you watch. Why? My throat was desert dry. I want to understand. The listener tilted its head, meaning pressed harder, cold and certain. Understand cost, understand silence, understand weight. The forest folded around me. I was standing in the same basin but decades earlier. Elias knelt by a stone circle, the brig's site. His hands were raw dirt caked in his nails. He laid bones carefully, whispering apologies. Behind him, shadows shifted. Bluebacks watched but did not interfere. The listener stood close, its attention wrapped around Elias like chains. Meaning flooded me, translated through Elias's voice. If you keep them from spilling, I'll keep them from hunting. 40 years, one watcher. That's the bargain. I saw my grandfather's face then, tired, streaked with grief but resolute. He had made a pact, not just observation. He hadn't studied. He'd contained. The vision snapped away. I was back in the basin, sweat cold on my spine. The listener moved closer. The hum grew so strong it rattled my teeth. Elias gone, boundary weak. Do you bind? Do you count? I realized what it wanted for me to take Elias's place, to watch, record, keep the borders intact, to give my life to the ridge the way Elias had. What happens if I don't? I asked. The answer landed like a stone dropped in a well. Noise, blood, no borders. Images filled my head. The mine's drills screaming into poor points, bluebacks flooding down into towns, crawlers tearing through barns, gliders circling schoolyards. Chaos unchecked. I staggered back, clutching my skull. I need time. The listener's shape blurred like heat shimmer. Meaning flickered once more. Time is counted. One dark moon. Feed. Decide. Then it stepped backward and dissolved into the trees. The hum drained away, leaving me shivering in a silence that felt suddenly fragile. By the time I stumbled back into the clearing, night had swallowed the ridge. The cabin lamps burned low. On the stump sat a new arrangement. Twigs crossed into an X, a stone pressed into the center, cedar sprigs bristling outward. I flipped to Elias's neat ledger. He had drawn the same symbol once with one word beneath it, test. My grandfather had faced the same choice, and he'd said yes. As I reached for the arrangement, the radio on Elias's shelf crackled alive, though no power ran to it. Static hissed, then cleared. A voice whispered through, too faint to be human, too deliberate to be accident. Count or bleed. The radio died, and in the distance near the drill site came a scream that was definitely human. The scream hadn't stopped ringing when I grabbed the Winchester from its rack. It wasn't an animal scream. It was human, high and tearing, the kind that drops every other sound in the world into silence just to make room for itself. Tanner stirred on the cot, eyes wide, lips moving. "Don't whistle," he muttered again, as if that phrase was all the mountain had left him. I stepped out onto the porch. The forest was too still. Not even the creek made noise. That kind of silence is worse than any sound. It's silence with intent. I ran north along the trail Elias had mapped, past the basin, up to the pour point where the mining crew had set their rig. The smell of diesel hit first, sharp and oily in the cool night. The drill still stood, auger sunk half its length into stone, but the crew wasn't working it. They were standing back, flashlights jittering, voices shaking. One man lay on the ground, leg twisted wrong, screaming. Another crouched over him, pressing a jacket to his thigh. Blood spread too fast, soaking dirt. And standing just outside the circle of light, too tall, too deliberate, was a blueback. Not stalking, not lunging, just watching. "Shoot it," one miner yelled, pointing a trembling flashlight beam. "No," I shouted before I could think. Too late. One of them raised a rifle. The crack split the basin open. Muzzle flash flared against the trees. The blueback jerked backward, a spray of dark wetness glinting in the light. It staggered once, eyes still reflecting that cold blue, then collapsed to one knee. The forest answered. The hum rose not from one throat but from everywhere, rolling like thunder under soil. Every man froze as the mountain itself vibrated around us. The miners shouted over each other, some cursing, some praying. Then came a new sound, quieter but worse. A ripping, like fabric tearing in a place too big for fabric. From the tree line, shapes crawled, not bluebacks. These were lower, jointed wrong, moving fast on all fours, knee crawlers. Elias had drawn them, but his sketches hadn't done justice to how wrong they looked in motion. They circled the wounded blueback. For a sick second I thought they were going to finish it off. But instead they positioned themselves between the miners and the fallen creature, backs arched, teeth bared. They weren't attacking. They were guarding. Then the hum changed pitch, higher, sharper, almost unbearable. Something else arrived. The flashlights faltered. Men's hands shook too hard to hold beams steady. But in that chaos I saw it, deeper in the trees, not fully in sight, but enough. A shape taller than any blueback, shifting like smoke, eyes black as wells. The listener. Its attention swept the clearing, and meaning slammed into me so hard I staggered. Blood spilled, border broken, rule void. The miners didn't hear the words. They just felt it, dropping to their knees, clutching heads, groaning as if their skulls were under pressure. I tried to shout, but my voice was swallowed by the hum. I managed only, "Stop, please," he didn't mean. But the meaning that pressed into me was absolute. One life for one breach. Order must answer. The fallen blueback raised its head, eyes locking onto me. Its chest heaved. It pressed one long hand into the soil, leaving a print deeper than any man's boot. Then, with effort, it reached toward me. Not hostile, not pleading, something else. Acknowledgement. Then it slumped, breath rattling out. The hum stuttered, then dropped. The listener faded back into the trees. The knee-crawlers lowered their hackles. Order had been restored through blood. The miners scrambled. One vomited into the brush. Another sobbed openly. Trent Walker, the foreman with the clipboard, grabbed my sleeve, eyes wild. "What the hell are those things?" he rasped. I shook him off. "Not bears," I said. "Not yours to shoot." He stared, pale and sweating, then turned and ran toward the trucks. The others followed, dragging the wounded man between them, leaving gear and rifles scattered like toys. The clearing emptied. Only I stayed. I couldn't leave the blueback's body. Elias's ledgers were clear. If one falls, you keep the order, you bury, you mark. It took me hours, hands blistered, back screaming. I dug until dawn smeared gray over the ridge. I covered the body with earth and stone, set cedar branches atop, and pressed my palm into the mound the way it had pressed its hand into the dirt. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice cracked. The hum answered once, low and short, a punctuation mark. When I staggered back to the cabin, exhausted, a new symbol waited on the stump. Not twigs, not stones. A circle of bloodied feathers arranged like a crown. And written in Elias's hurried hand in the margin of his second ledger, I found the same symbol, with one word scrawled beside it: reckoning. I barely slept. Every time my eyes closed, I saw that blueback's hand pressed into the dirt, reaching, not for me, not for mercy, but for acknowledgement. My palms still burned from burying it. At dawn, the crown of bloodied feathers still sat on the stump, dew beating on their quills. The air around it felt heavier, like a courtroom waiting for the judge to enter. Elias had written one word beside the symbol in his rushed ledger: reckoning. By mid-morning I was in town, standing under flickering fluorescent lights in the county clerk's office. I'd printed the trail cam stills, bluebacks herding miners, markers hung on trees, the lattice grid, proof in a way, not of monsters but of patterns, of something older than mining rights. The clerk looked at me like I was ordering a pizza in Latin. "You're filing what exactly?" "Injunction," I said. "Environmental protection. Wetlands, endangered salamanders, loss of historic habitat." My grandfather documented 40 years of data. He filed surveys. They are in the filing cabinet at the cabin. I'm adding new evidence. I slid the stills across the counter. She flipped through, barely glancing, then paused at the one frame of a blueback hand mid-gesture, palm out. She frowned, set it aside, and stamped my petition. "Judge'll look at it," she said. "Don't hold your breath. They fast-track mining permits when timber money's involved." On my way back, I stopped at the sheriff's office. Deputy Prout met me out front, arms crossed, hat tilted back. "You look like you dug a grave," he said quietly. I didn't answer. He studied my face, then nodded like he'd guessed anyway. "Sheriff wants me to ask if you've got proof these mining boys are lying about their missing men." I held up the folder. "I've got better than proof. I've got patterns, and if the court won't listen, the mountain will." His mouth tightened. "Mr. Hale, there's law and there's blood. Out here the two don't always shake hands." Back at the cabin, I found the blood feather crown replaced with something else, a bundle of sticks tied in a perfect square dripping with resin. I flipped open the rushed ledger. The same square was sketched there. Elias's note: "If they give you resin, they want it burned. Smoke is contract." So I built a small fire in the pit, laid the bundle on, and watched it burn. The resin snapped and hissed, sending thick black smoke into the canopy. The HUM answered once, brief, approving. That night the forest sang again, not the beautiful lunar choir I'd heard before. This was harsher, clipped, a dirge. They were mourning. The next morning, Prout's truck pulled up. He stepped out slower this time, hat in his hands. "Court delayed your injunction," he said flatly. "Judge kicked it 2 weeks down the road, companies pushing hard. They'll have machines rolling before the ink's dry." He hesitated, then added, "And one more thing. County coroner got a call. They found remains on a logging road. Not a full body, just arranged pieces. Sheriff doesn't want that story out, says it'll spook folks." I knew better. The creatures weren't just answering breaches with blood, they were sending a message. That night I sat at the table with both ledgers open, papers scattered, maps spread like a war room. On one side, Elias's careful rules, law of silence, law of boundaries. On the other, the county's stamped petitions, human law printed in black and white. Neither cared about the other, and I was standing in the seam between them, pulled in both directions. When the lamps burned low, the radio crackled again. A voice, not words but meaning, forced through static. "Choose law, choose blood, not both." The radio died. At dawn I hiked to the north line. Fresh flagging tape snapped in the breeze, new bright orange, marked A, R, M, test bore 2. And on the ground beneath it, a body lay, not a miner, a blueback, smaller than the one I'd buried but laid out in careful order. Hands folded, cedar sprigs across its chest, a strip of surveyor's tape tied like a shroud. The forest hadn't killed this one. Humans had, and the balance was about to break. The new moon fell like a lid over the ridge. No stars bright enough to break it, no moonlight to sketch the tree line. Just black on black, as if the mountain had swallowed the sky whole. Elias's neat ledger had warned me. Do not go out during the new moon. That's when the boundaries are thinnest. That's when they hunger. But his rushed ledger said something else, almost contradictory. If you don't feed them, then you don't come back. The long dark is a tithe. I had no choice. I dragged the old iron cauldron from the shed. Elias had written pot in one book and bowl in the other, but the cauldron was the only thing that fit both. I filled it with venison strips, apples, and black bread. On top I laid the hag stone tied to twine as Elias had diagrammed, a marker of intent. On the stump in the clearing I set 3 lamps, each wick trimmed to a needle flame. 3, I muttered, remembering the knocks on my window, the scratches on the boundary log. They wanted order, they wanted count. The air was wrong even before I stepped back. No crickets, no owls, not even the creek. Silence like a held breath. They came in silence first. Walkers, bluebacks, stepping from the tree line, eyes reflecting nothing now that there was no moon, a dozen at least. Then more, circling the clearing. They didn't move toward the offering, they moved toward me. I raised my palm, Elias's gesture. Slowly, they parted and formed 2 lines, leaving a corridor between them. An invitation or a demand. My heart rattled, but my boots carried me forward. Each step into the corridor felt heavier, as though the silence itself wanted to drag me down. At the far end, something larger waited. The listener stood at the edge of the clearing, taller than them all, shape bending like heat shimmer, eyes void black. It didn't speak aloud. It never did. Meaning thundered into me. Feed, or be fed. My knees almost gave. I dragged the cauldron forward, set it between us. The smell of venison and bread rose, oddly strong in the airless night. The listener lifted one long hand. A blueback stepped forward, took a strip of meat and placed it in its mouth with something like reverence. One by one they followed. Bread, fruit, meat, passing the bowl in precise order. When the cauldron was nearly empty, one of them picked up the hag stone. It held it to the skyless dark. Then it set it back down in front of me. The message landed sharp. Now you. I hesitated. Elias's ledger had warned. Don't eat what they eat. Don't drink what they drink, but if they press, pretend. I picked up the last apple slice. It was slick, too slick, as though soaked in something that wasn't juice. My throat locked. Still, I lifted it to my mouth. I let my teeth scrape the flesh but didn't swallow, just chewed once, twice, then tucked the pulp under my tongue like a communion I didn't trust. The walkers watched, silent. The listener leaned closer. Its eyes didn't blink. Meaning pressed in. Truth or hunger, decide. For a heartbeat I thought it knew, then as if satisfied it straightened. The hum rose low and immense, and the walkers stepped back, melting into trees. The ritual was done. When I staggered back to the cabin, the lamp sputtered out all at once. Tanner, pale and wild-eyed, sat on the floor by the hearth. "You heard them," he whispered. "Didn't you?" I didn't answer. He leaned closer, voice cracking. "They told me the price. One of us. They'll take one of us if the others keep drilling." I froze. In my pocket, the hag stone still pulsed warm against my thigh, as if keeping count. From the ridge came the groan of machinery, mine drills grinding into stone, louder than they had any right to be. And in the silence between each bite of sound, another noise threaded through, soft, deliberate, too close, knuckles rapping 3 times on the cabin wall. Knock, knock, knock. The long dark wasn't over yet. The knocks didn't stop. 3 pause, 3 again, slow, deliberate. The kind of rhythm you don't mistake for wind or branches. The kind of rhythm that means someone is waiting for an answer. Tanner cowered near the hearth, rocking with his blanket tight. "Don't open it," he whispered. "Don't you dare." But the ledger was clear. 3 knocks, invitation. Refuse and they take, answer and you bargain. I opened the door. The clearing beyond was empty. No walkers, no listener, just the new moon dark pressing down. The lamps I'd set earlier were gone, taken or extinguished. At the stump something lay waiting, not twigs, not stones this time, a strip of bright orange survey tape tied into a noose. The HUM crawled through the air. Then the meaning hit me as sharp as a nail through wood. 1 for 1, tithe for breach. My stomach clenched. They wanted payment, not an animal, not bread, not venison, a life. Tanner must have felt it too because he bolted up, eyes wild. "They're not taking me," he hissed. "You hear me, not me. I'll fight, I'll run, I'll—" He stopped when he saw the look on my face. Because the truth was worse, it wasn't about who they wanted, it was about who I was willing to give. The mine crews had spilled blueback blood. Now the ridge demanded blood in return. Elias's rushed ledger had a scrawled note beside the word tithe. "Better to choose than let them choose. The forest is cruel when left to decide for itself." I carried the tape back inside, laid it on the table between us. "They're asking," I said. Tanner shook his head, tears streaking his dirty cheeks. No, I didn't shoot, I didn't kill anything, I didn't." "You were here," I said softly. "So was I." His breathing turned ragged. "You'll give me to them after what I've seen, after Briggs, after last night." I slammed the ledger shut. "You think I want this?" But the silence in the cabin told us both the truth. Wanting had nothing to do with it. Headlights swept across the clearing. An engine growled. A truck door slammed. Deputy Pruitt's voice rang out, "Mason, you in there?" I opened the door. He stood with one hand on his holster, scanning the tree line. "Sheriff sent me up. Another miner's gone. Found his helmet near the pour point, split like it had been peeled. Company's screaming lawsuit. Judge is talking injunction against you now." He noticed Tanner crouched behind me, eyes wild. Then he saw the strip of survey tape on the table. His face darkened. "They've asked, haven't they?" he said, not a question, knowledge. Inside the cabin, the HUM rose, shaking the lamp glass. Pruitt pressed his hat tighter to his head, jaw clenched. "Mason, listen to me. The mountain's law doesn't stop at the courthouse door, but neither does ours. You hand him over, you're complicit. You keep him, you're damned. That's the corner Elias painted himself into, and it ate him alive." Tanner sobbed, "Please, don't let them take me." The HUM spiked, rattling dishes from shelves. Outside, the 3 knocks started again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. The listener stepped into the clearing, black eyes shifting shape, taller than the cabin itself. Meaning cracked through the walls. "Choose, human for human, border for border, tonight." The radio sputtered alive on the shelf, Elias's voice bursting through static. "Don't let the forest decide for you. If you refuse, it takes the nearest. It doesn't care who." The cabin shook as the knocks pounded harder. I stood between Tanner, the tape, and the door, every part of me tearing in half. Deputy Pruitt's hand hovered near his pistol, though we both knew bullets meant nothing. His eyes locked on mine. "Whose law you gonna keep, Mason?" he asked. Outside, the listener waited. Inside, Tanner whispered, "Please." And I realized that whatever choice I made, I wasn't walking away the same man. The night pressed against the cabin like a living thing. The knocks had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse, like the forest had stepped back to give me room, to see what choice I would make. Tanner wept quietly against the hearth. Pruitt stood at the door, hand hovering near his holster, eyes burning through me. "Mason," he said, voice low, "don't let them pick. You pick, or the mountain picks for you. And the mountain doesn't have mercy." The ledger lay open on the table. Elias's frantic hand scrawled across a page from 1993. Tithe demanded, tried misdirection once, substitution, didn't hold. The next line was smudged, unreadable, as though he'd pressed his hand down to blot ink he didn't want remembered. But the thought rooted itself anyway. What if I didn't give them Tanner? What if I gave them something else, something human but not alive? The miners had left gear scattered at the pour point. Helmets, coats, bloodied gloves, pieces of themselves. Maybe enough. I grabbed my pack, stuffed it with whatever scraps I'd salvaged from their camps, cloth, boots, even a half-empty thermos. Symbols of men, if not men themselves. Prute's face went hard. You really think they'll fall for that? I don't know, I said. But I'm not handing a boy over to die because the forest keeps score like a bookkeeper. At midnight, I carried the pack out to the stump. The clearing felt crowded, though no one stood there. Every tree seemed to lean closer. I set the pack down, untied the orange survey tape noose and draped it across the offering like a ribbon. Then I raised my palm, Elias's gesture, heart pounding. For a moment, nothing. Then the air thickened. Blueback stepped from the tree-line, silent, eyes glowing faint. They circled the stump, sniffed, touched the boots, lifted the thermos. The HUM rose, questioning. The listener appeared last, shape bending the dark. Meaning hit me like cold water. Not flesh, not blood, not law. The pack burst into flame without a match. Boots curled, cloth shriveled, thermos shrieked as it warped. In seconds nothing was left but ash. The HUM dropped into a growl. Deceit, debt doubled. The ground shook. From the tree line came a new sound, low, chattering, insect-like, knee crawlers, dozens of them. Their eyes glinted like wet coins as they poured into the clearing. Circling the cabin, Tanner screamed. Prute drew his pistol, though he knew it was useless. The walkers didn't attack, but their intent pressed in, thick as smoke. One for one, now two. I stumbled back toward the porch, heart hammering. My attempt to cheat had only made things worse. Inside, Tanner clutched my sleeve. "Don't let them take me, Mason, please, don't let them." But Prute cut him off, voice steady, eyes hard. "Boy, you don't get it. It was never about you or me. It's about the choice." He looked at me. "They want you to stand where your grandfather stood. They don't care which life. They care that you choose." He pulled a silver flask from his coat, drank once, then set it on the table. His face was pale but resolved. "I'll buy you time," he said. Before I could stop him, he opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch. He didn't raise his gun. He raised his palm, copying Elias's gesture I'd shown him. The walkers stilled. The HUM deepened. Prute turned his head just enough to meet my eyes. "File your papers, keep your borders, somebody's gotta." Then he walked down the steps toward the clearing. The bluebacks closed around him. The listener's void eyes fixed on me. Meaning carved itself into my skull like fire. Debt paid, choice delayed, one dark moon more. The HUM subsided, the clearing emptied, and Prute was gone. On the stump, in place of the ashes, lay a new symbol. Cedar branches tied into a circle, with a single sheriff star pinned at its center. The cedar circle still smoked where resin had burned, but the star pinned in its center gleamed clean, untouched. Prute's badge, proof of his choice or his surrender or both. I didn't touch it. My hands wouldn't move. Inside the cabin, Tanner sat curled against the cot, whispering, "He's gone. He's gone. They took him." But I knew better. Prute hadn't been taken. He'd walked into their law with eyes open. That was the difference. At dawn, I finally reached for the badge. The cedar circle crumbled at my touch, but the star stayed cool, too cool, as though it had been carved from river water instead of metal. Elias's neat ledger had an entry. If they return a token, it's not a trophy, it's a contract, to where it is to answer. I held the badge up. For a heartbeat, the clearing bent as if the ridge itself leaned closer. The meaning settled into me like iron. Mediator, bridge, sheriff of borders. Prute hadn't just died. He'd nominated me. That night I burned the cedar scraps in the fire pit. The flame sputtered green, and in the smoke I saw words scrawled in Elias's frantic hand, though no page lay in front of me. Law and blood, both will come. You must speak both languages or neither will hear. I coughed hard enough to tear my throat. When the smoke cleared, the badge lay in my lap again, as though refusing to be discarded. Near midnight, the HUM rose low, almost questioning. Bluebacks appeared at the edge of the clearing, not circling, waiting. One stepped forward, the tall one with gaslight eyes, the same that had pressed its hand to my window. It placed something on the stump, a bundle of legal papers, my petition, stamped, dated, smudged with mud. They'd taken it from town. I unfolded it. The judge's stamp was faint but clear, delayed. The blueback tilted its head, watching me. Not mockery, not threat, expectation. They wanted to know if I would keep trying human law, even when human law moved slower than the mountain's patience. I raised the badge. The HUM surged like approval. Behind me, Tanner shouted from the cabin, "Stop feeding into it. You're just replacing him, don't you see? They'll eat you alive like they ate your grandpa, like they ate the sheriff." His voice cracked. "We should run. Get in the truck, go. Let the miners deal with this. Let the state deal with this." I almost told him the truth. That if we ran, the state would have bodies stacked in days. That the bluebacks didn't care about zip codes. Instead, I just said, "You go and the forest chooses, and it won't choose kindly." He stared at me like I'd already become one of them. Maybe I had. By morning, Tanner was gone. His boots, his pack, his fear, he'd taken them all. In his place on the stump lay another arrangement, a spiral of black feathers, each tip dipped in something dark. Blood, but not human. The ledger had one word for the spiral: advance. It meant the borders were shifting. The mountain wasn't waiting anymore. I pinned Prout's badge to my jacket and felt it burn cold against my chest. From the north, machinery roared, chainsaws, drills, engines. The miners had returned in force. And from the ridge above them came an answering chorus, hundreds of voices layered into one terrible harmony. The bluebacks weren't waiting for tithe anymore. They were marching to war. The sound of chainsaws cut the morning in half. It wasn't just noise, it was invasion, tearing into quiet like teeth through skin. From the ridge, the blueback's choir answered, not in song this time, but in a roar layered with too many voices to be human. I stood in the clearing, Prout's badge burning cold on my chest, the air vibrating with two laws colliding, human machinery against mountain silence. I followed the sound north. The forest leaned inward as if funneling me toward the breach. Every basin I passed thrummed with HUM, the pour points glowing in my skull like veins under skin. Elias's maps weren't cartography anymore, they were arteries, and the mountain's blood was boiling. When I reached the ridge road, I saw them. Dozens of miners, chainsaws ripping, augers biting, trucks belching diesel into the tree line. Their laughter was brittle, too loud, fear dressed as bravado. And beyond them, at the tree line, stood the bluebacks, not hiding, not circling, standing upright in rows, their eyes a wall of reflected blue flame. Trent Walker, the clipboard foreman, spotted me. His face was pale but furious. "You brought this down on us, Hale, you and your crazy old man. We're within our rights, permits signed, maps filed. This is our land to cut." The HUM surged behind him as if the forest itself mocked his paperwork. I lifted Prout's badge. "Your law ends where their border begins." Trent spat in the dirt. "Bears and fairy tales don't make law." He waved a hand. "Keep cutting." Chainsaws whined louder. The bluebacks stepped forward in unison. The miners broke first, not the bluebacks. One of the younger men revved his saw too close to the tree line. The chain snagged, sparked. The sound screeched through the basin like a scream. The forest answered. Crawlers burst from the underbrush, skittering low, jointed wrong. They knocked the saw from his hands, scattering sparks across leaves, then vanished back into shadow without touching him. A warning. The man fell to his knees, shaking. The bluebacks roared together, one impossible voice, shattering glass in truck windows, rattling metal in bolts. The chainsaws went silent. Every eye, human and not, turned to me. My knees wanted to buckle, but the badge burned steady against my chest. The meaning poured into me, clear, cold. Mediator, speak. Law to law. I stepped between them, heart hammering, throat raw. Stop. For a miracle, both sides did. Chainsaws lowered. Blueback stilled. You cut, I told Trent. They bleed, you push, they push back. The border's law is older than your deeds. You can't erase it with ink. Trent's face twisted. So what? Hand the whole mountain over to monsters. Let them tell us where we can breathe. Before I could answer, the listener stepped out of the trees. It loomed, shape bending, void eyes swallowing daylight. The miners staggered, some clutching their heads, some dropping tools. Trent fell to his knees, mouth open but no words coming. Meaning slammed into me. No compromise, no coexistence, balance by blood or by exile. The choice wasn't negotiation, it was ultimatum. Behind me, the miners muttered, some praying, some cursing. In front of me, the bluebacks shifted, claws clicking against stone, and the badge seared against my chest as if burning the decision into me. The listener's voice crushed through me, undeniable. One side leaves, one side stays. You choose, Sheriff. Behind me, Trent whispered hoarsely, don't you dare side with them. In front of me, a blueback raised its hand, palm open, waiting. And I realized the mountain wasn't asking for mediation anymore. It was demanding judgment. The ridge held its breath. The miners stared at me like drowning men waiting for a rope. The bluebacks stood in their ranks, silent, patient, reflecting back every ounce of judgment I'd been handed. The listener's voice pressed into me, heavy as gravity. One side leaves, one side stays, choose. Prute's badge seared against my chest. I felt his voice in the static memory of the radio. Don't let the forest decide for you. If I refused, the mountain would choose on its own, and it wouldn't pick the way I wanted. But what was justice? Saving the miners who had spilled blood, or honoring the creatures who had kept this ridge alive long before any surveyor drove a stake? I raised the badge high. The HUM surged through the basin, rattling the trucks, bending tree limbs. My grandfather gave his life to keep the balance, I said, voice raw. Deputy Prute gave his to buy me one more moon. The miners cut too deep. They broke the border. The tithe is theirs. Trent's face went white. You can't. The listener's meaning cut him off. Judgment passed. The bluebacks roared as one. The crawlers burst from the brush. Gliders swept overhead, wings black against the gray sky. The miners broke. Chainsaws clattered to the dirt, trucks roared in reverse, men screaming as creatures surged. But it wasn't a slaughter, not yet. The bluebacks herded, not tore. They drove the miners back toward the logging road, corralling them like wild cattle, until one miner raised a pistol. The shot cracked the air. A blueback staggered, shoulder tearing open. The forest's restraint shattered. The crawlers descended, fast, silent. One miner vanished under them before his scream finished. Another was pulled into the tree-line, rifle spinning away. Gliders dove, wings slicing through canvas tents, scattering sawdust and maps. The bluebacks charged in rows, massive, methodical. I shouted, raised the badge, begged for order, but the HUM drowned me out. The listener's meaning thundered in my skull. Debt repaid, reckoning due. Blood sprayed across flagging tape. The chainsaws were silent now, drowned by screams and the low, terrible choir of the ridge. By dusk, silence fell again. The clearing was littered with broken machines, shredded tarps, abandoned tools. No miners remained. Those not taken had fled down the road, leaving their dead behind. The bluebacks stood in the wreckage, breathing heavy, eyes reflecting the last light. Then, one by one, they turned and melted back into the forest. Only the listener remained, towering, shifting, eyes locked on me. Law kept, balance held, but blood stains, borders move. Then it was gone, leaving me alone among the wreckage. On the ground near my boots lay a new symbol, a circle of survey tape, tied with cedar sprigs soaked in human blood. Elias's rushed ledger had a note beside that exact shape. If they mark with man's tools, the balance has tipped. The war is no longer theirs alone, it's ours. And as the last truck's engine echoed faint down the valley, I realized the reckoning hadn't ended. It had only begun. The clearing stank of oil, sap, and iron. Machines bled their fluids into the dirt like carcasses. Chainsaws lay cracked open, their teeth scattered like bones. The survey tape circle at my feet was the worst of it, cedar sprigs tied neat but soaked through with human blood. Elias's rushed ledger hadn't lied. If they mark with man's tools, the balance has tipped. The war is no longer theirs alone, it's ours. The forest wasn't just answering anymore. It was adapting. Back at the cabin, I couldn't sit still. I tore through shelves, rifled through trunks, even checked under the cot. Finally, behind the filing cabinet, I found it. A drawer hidden so cleanly I would have missed it if the badge hadn't burned cold against my chest when I brushed past. Inside lay a third ledger. Not neat like the first, not frantic like the second. This one was smaller, bound with copper wire, the cover burned with a single word in Elias's hand. Legacy. I opened it with trembling fingers. The first page was addressed to me. Mason, if you are reading this, then the balance has tipped. They will use your tools against you. They will use your laws against you. And you will think the war is lost, but it isn't war, it's inheritance. He described years of preparation. Legal filings, yes, environmental surveys, but also something deeper. A system of coded, safe zones mapped not just by pins but by stories. Local legends, family myths, even county fair ghost tales. Stories hold borders as well as maps. When men believe a place is haunted, they don't cut it. When law recognizes danger, it fences it. Use both, law and lore, only both will hold. I froze when I turned the next page. Elias had sketched a figure, thin, young, wearing a miner's vest. Beneath it he had scrawled, "The weak one always runs. If he runs, follow. He carries the breach with him." Tanner. I thought he'd fled for good, maybe to the next town. But if Elias was right, Tanner wasn't just gone, he was carrying the border itself with him. A breach on two legs, and wherever he went the creatures would follow. The last pages were less instruction, more confession. Walter fed them. Prout bought you time. My sin was thinking I could keep them penned forever. They are older than pens, older than law. But if you can braid human law with theirs, ink and blood, map and myth, you may hold them long enough to pass the burden on. That is our legacy, not victory, only endurance. I closed the ledger. My hands shook. At dawn I drove into Copper Falls. The streets were quiet, shuttered. Folks had heard the noise on the ridge even if they didn't understand it. Near the diner I saw it. A new mark sprayed in red paint across the brick wall, a spiral of feathers drawn by human hands. Except no one in town painted that careful, that precise. Someone or something was carrying the forest's law into town. I touched the badge. Cold fire ran through me. The meaning was clear. The border had moved. As I turned back toward the truck, a voice called my name. Thin, hoarse. Tanner. He stood at the far end of Main Street, pale, eyes ringed dark, survey tape dangling from his hands like prayer beads. "They're coming with me," he whispered. "They chose me." And behind him, at the edge of town, the HUM began to rise. The HUM rolled down Main Street like a storm front. Windows rattled, neon signs flickered, every dog in Copper Falls howled and then went silent. Tanner stood in the center of the pavement, orange survey tape dangling from his fists, eyes vacant. He didn't look like a boy anymore. He looked like a boundary marker. Behind him, at the edge of town, the bluebacks waited. Not hidden, not ashamed. Lined up like sentries, their eyes reflecting street lamps. And above them, perched in the oaks, gliders stretched their wings. The forest had followed him home. I walked toward him, Prute's badge heavy on my chest. Every step felt like walking into court with no lawyer, no jury, just the sentence waiting. "Tanner," I called, my voice cracked. "Come back, they're using you." His head tilted, the survey tape unspooled in his hands like intestines. "I didn't run," he whispered. "They wanted me. I'm theirs now, better me than you." The listener stepped forward, its void eyes pinned me in place. Meaning pressed like knives. "Sheriff of Borders, he is breach, close or keep. Close or keep, kill him or bind him." I pulled out the legacy ledger. Elias's last lines burned in my head. "Our inheritance is not victory, it is endurance. You will not win. You will only hold long enough to pass it on." Maybe Tanner wasn't meant to die. Maybe he was meant to join, become what Elias called the weak one who runs. A carrier of the border, a fuse. But if I let him go, the HUM would follow him, dragging borders across every town, every road. If I killed him, maybe the forest would seal, but the stain of blood would stay on me forever. The badge burned colder than ice. It didn't want mercy. It wanted decision. I looked Tanner in the eyes. For the first time, he seemed lucid, almost pleading. "I can carry it," he whispered. "I can keep them away from you." The bluebacks shifted, watching, silent. The listener's shape blurred against the lamplight. I raised the badge. "I'll keep it," I said. "Not you, me." The HUM froze, even the air seemed to stop. The listener moved closer, its hand, enormous and wrong, pressed against my forehead. For a heartbeat, my skull filled with light, my veins with roots. I saw every basin, every pore point, every quiet well Elias had mapped. I saw the border stretched thin, glowing like a scar. Then I saw myself stitched into it. Not outside, not above, part of it. The listener withdrew, meaning sealed inside me like iron. "Sheriff of Borders, the watch is yours." The bluebacks lowered their heads, the HUM softened, a sigh of relief, and Tanner collapsed, the tape spilling from his hands, his chest rising slow, free. Weeks later, the town forgot. The miners pulled out, lawsuits buried under paperwork. Folks called it a bad investment, bad luck, nothing more. But I stayed at the cabin. Nights I light the lamps. I leave food on the stump. I walk the borders Elias mapped and add new marks where the silence grows. Sometimes Tanner visits, his eyes clearer, his voice less haunted. He never goes far into the woods. He doesn't need to, that's my work now. And on certain nights, new moon nights, I sit at the stump with the badge cold on my chest. The walkers gather, the gliders sing, and the listener stands in the trees. We don't speak. We don't need to. Because I understand now what Elias knew, what Prute gave his life to teach me. We are not the owners here. We are not even the neighbors. We are the guests, and my job, my legacy is simple: to watch, to endure, to hold the quiet until someone else is foolish enough or faithful enough to take it from me.